rockets suck,
Especially,
mortars suck, but you know the most terrifying ever was a Dishka, a 50 cal Dishka in plunging fire mode. So it's like a kilometer or two away, and you know there's no whistle, there's no warning. By the time the acoustic hits your ears, the 50 cal rounds are already raining around you. That was terrifying. You're just seeing little plumes. Sorry.
totally. That's never happened. I've never taken plunging fire from a direct fire weapon like that. I've been on the receiving end of mortars and Chinese 107s. And the scary thing isn't the first impact, because usually that's way off. It's when you see them starting to bracket in and you're in the middle, you know, and you're like, man, one more really good adjustment and these guys are going to be on
One
target.
more really good adjustment and it's on the chow hall. Yeah.
That's right. Well, it was never, so I never on a fixed installation was I ever really close to enemy fire, but out in like open desert where there's no you know, there's no obscuration, there's nothing, and we're in like a semi-firm status, and they're just, you know, we can't pack up in time to get off the X, you know, what do you do, you know? And so the fastest thing is determine where they are and return fire to like screw them up. And for my situations, it was always a good thing that the Baluch Taliban were lobbing in rockets and mortars out of the bed of a truck, you know, like a janky technical. And so like their bracketing and their adjustments were never going to be very accurate anyway. So like that was a little bit of a solace. And then maybe 50% of the time we had a CAS asset on station and they didn't know it. And, you know, and they started the wrong fight at the wrong time.
That's exactly the Dishkas, the 50 cals. So the fixed installations, the rockets were a problem. I mean, but my platoon sergeant caught shrapnel. You know, we did that thing during the strip surge where we put like platoon cops way forward, out in these just horrible placement of all of them. And so we were taking sniper fire on the actual fixed installation, because they were so poorly planned. But the Katishkas and the rockets would come into the actual outpost. When we're out in the desert, it was those, to your point, a technical vehicle. You can move around anywhere, you know, retrograde quickly, set it up, and then put it in plunging fire. And they were actually pretty good at walking in that plunging fire on my guys. To your point, it only took one time, and then the second time, AH-64s in standoff, following us around, out of sight, sound, and small arms range. Then 50 cal opens up again, and AH-64 talk on target and smokes them. Absolutely beautiful. I love this aircraft that we're about to talk about. I love it.
It's great.
I absolutely love it.
Totally. I had a section of British H-64s flying for us in one HVT raid context, and they did some beautiful work. I don't want to derail the topic here. It's a beautiful aircraft. CAS is the best, especially when deployed over civilian infrastructure in the United States. Am I right, Dave?
Yeah, so I think it was the 101st, my former unit. I think it was the 101st cab that flew AH-64s, or maybe one AH-64, maybe two of them, around Kid Rock's house, as they were already flying missions in Nashville. Are you reading it now?
I'm reading two. There were two. There was a -1 and a -2.
That's
right.
Can you imagine the comms between those aviators? As they're doing some mission in Tennessee, or some training mission in Tennessee, like, hey, did you know Kid Rock's house is right over there? It's like,
so
I
here's
dare
the
you, Manchester.
let me read a quick summary, just so for those who have no idea what we're talking about can get up to speed. On March 28th, 2026, musician Kid Rock sparked a national controversy after posting videos of two Army AH-64 Apache helicopters, later confirmed to come from the 101st Combat Aviation Brigade, the 101st Cab. These two birds were hovering low over his Nashville estate. In the footage, the artist is seen saluting and cheering the aircraft from his poolside, which features a replica of the Statue of Liberty. There was an investigation. The U.S. Army initially suspended the air crews belonging to the 101st Cab. While launching the investigation, officials noted that the flyby was not an authorized outreach event and was a deviation from their prescribed training mission. there's a political context here. We're not going to wade too deeply into this. But the same helicopters were also spotted flying over a No Kings protest, which is this kind of anti-authoritarian movement that's aimed at the Trump administration. Demonstrations against the Trump administration in downtown Nashville earlier that day. While the Army claimed the timing was coincidental, critics questioned the use of taxpayer-funded military assets for what appeared to be a political or personal display. On March 31st, so this is yesterday at the time of recording, or 2 days ago at the time of this podcast going live, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, abruptly intervened, nullifying the Army's investigation and lifting the pilot's suspensions. Hegseth dismissed the probe via social media, telling the crews to carry on, Patriots. So again, let's not wade too deeply into the politics here. It would be funny, except that this probably is an inappropriate use of government assets and et cetera, et cetera. So, Dave, what were your buddies doing?
Yeah, I don't know if they're my buddies because I served in the same unit 15 years ago. I I think the No
They were
Kings.
probably they were probably lieutenants, you know.
I smell lieutenant or or CWO. There's a chief warrant there, but I just want to hear the radio. I just want to hear the comms from that. Hey, Kid Rock's house is right over there. Should we do a flyby? Manchester, you won't do it, right? That's a very. I expect that's what the comms sounded like.
Yeah,
and I think probably. I think the investigation will probably find that it was harmless. But I just hate anything that erodes the public's trust in the military as an institution. And the stuff like that erodes trust, which is why it's a big deal. And to not wade too deep into it, the No Kings thing, in my mind, the No Kings thing and the coincidence there is a bigger deal than flying by a musician's house.
Yeah, totally. I completely agree there. And then you see this is common in the Trump administration too, where they reach down from the heights of Mount Olympus and stop an investigation or otherwise solve a situation in advance of a normal investigation playing all the way through. That seems like a current admin thing.
So what is every pilot, what is every Army aviator talking about at the lunch table right now across the force?
Yeah, they're like
hey, what musicians are nearby? Our installation.
Yeah,
guaranteed.
Well, apparently Kid Rock later, who's a vocal admin supporter, and I think a friend of President Trump at some level. I don't know how that is even possible, but he defended the pilot, stating that such flybys are relatively common around his home and in his area, and that he remains a friendly spot, in quotes, friendly spot for local military personnel.
It's super common for a flying tank to hover over his pool. Yeah,
apparently.
It's normal Tuesday.
Once upon a time, I tried to coordinate a big piece of an estate that I rented, like the corner of an estate, which is where my family and I lived. And it was kind of out in relatively rural coastal California. And at one point I tried to coordinate one of my reserve units access to this facility or to this land for some training purposes. Probably wasn't entirely, the best use of whatever resources or whatever. But one of the reasons for it is that we knew that a section of Stockton-based CH-47s was going to be training in the area, and we wanted access as a Marine unit that rarely gets access to aviation platforms. We were trying to coordinate use of this private land to do some, reserve training amongst joint assets, and it didn't end up working out. But I could imagine that some of the, the folks in the area might have been alarmed that CH-47s are flying in and around and landing on and doing stuff on a private, estate somewhere in coastal California.
I did the exact same thing, landed in random farmland in the middle of nowhere. And it was all a buzz. We actually wove that in and invited the local community to come out and have a CH-47 petting zoo. So it worked out.
I actually think there is probably space for more public-private engagement on this sort of thing. I mean, as you and I know, it's so hard sometimes to find training facilities, right? Like open range space on the timeline that you need it. And there are so many, willing, patriotic, landowners who would love nothing more than to host a training unit, a unit to come in and do some training on their private, ranch land or whatever.
I have
And
yet to find a salsa de arroz American farmer that you can't ask if you can do some U.S.
exactly,
military training exercise on
that's
their
exactly,
land. That
yeah.
will tell you no, they love it. All they ask is that you pick up the brass.
Yeah, pick up the brass and like try not to land directly in the corn,
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Well, I
don't
assume
kill don't
you've got
kill any of my livestock with those rotors.
you've got a deep Halo background from the reconnaissance community. I assume you've probably landed in quite a few farmers' fields just jumping, right?
Accidentally. There's a drop zone. There's a drop zone on the North Shore of Oahu in California that we would often use, and it was a private facility. It's a ranch. I won't name it, just in case that was not supposed to be publicly named. But anyway, it is adjacent to a very large piece of ranch property with lots of cattle, and um, the the boundary between the drop zone itself and land that we were not supposed to be accessing, it was like 50 feet, right? And so like you get a little bit off, or I it's been a long time since I jumped around canopy, but you can't steer a T11 canopy. You just can't. No matter what they tell you at the schoolhouse, you cannot steer that thing. And so if the if the jump master puts you out in the wrong spot, sorry, you're going into the cattle grazing land, right? And
So
so yeah, we landed in many a strange piece of terrain.
we need to get off this topic, but I'm going to strongly agree with you on the cannot control a static line parachute topic. That entire course of the Army run should be like in one day, maybe a single afternoon. Feet and knees
But yeah,
together, jump away from the airplane. That's it.
the
Jump
joke the joke, and I know this is not unique to the Marine Corps, but the joke about the Army's basic airborne course, BAC, is that it is 5 training days crammed into 3 weeks.
So when
You know,
I lived at Fort Benning, when I lived near Fort Benning, I was right outside of Friars Z. So the errant paratrooper, I'm getting up to
wait, that's
go to
Alabama, right? You're on the Alabama side?
yeah, I was on the Alabama side,
Yeah.
at Fort Mitchell, Alabama. So the errant paratrooper, I'm getting ready to go to PT, or I'm coming back to have coffee or breakfast with my wife or something before going to work. And there's always an errant paratrooper that's basically landing in the
Oh,
woods in my backyard.
yeah.
That's some
Sometimes
19-year-old.
sometimes screaming because they broke their tibia fibia.
I'm like, all right, man, get up, get in the truck. I'll take you to work. Where's your platoon sergeant? What's his name?
Yeah. 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 I'll drive you back to the bus to the link up location or whatever. Yeah. Okay. Well, with that, welcome to the Goat Rodeo podcast. I am here with regular co-host Dave Caudle. Regular co-host Simon Kuhn is not in the mix today, and I'm your host Garrett Smith. On the Goat Rodeo, we discuss everything from geopolitics and current conflict zones all the way to the venture capital industry, the technology, startup, non-traditional contractor space, and everything in between. And we welcome your comments and notes to guide our discussions on a week-to-week basis. We drop this every Thursday morning, and we envision that it is a welcoming, low-threat environment for the community to engage on a set of important national security technology topics. So, with all of that, I'm going to reel through a couple of interesting venture capital items that are going on in our space, and I'll pause just for brief discussion or commentary, Dave, if you have anything you'd like to discuss. But on March 26th, so this is last week, Shield AI, a significant rising non-traditional contractor in our space in Southern California, announced a $2 billion financing package that valued the company at $12.7 billion. That's pretty sizable. They've been kind of chasing the gorilla of the space, Anduril Industries, for years at this point. They're actually a little bit older than Anduril, as I recall. I think Shield AI was founded in 2015. I could be wrong about that. And the structure is that it was a classic, I think, in quotes, Series G equity round co-led by Advent International and JP Morgan Chase, which is interesting given that JP Morgan only recently started doing significant venture engagements. And last year, Jamie Dimon himself announced a large $1.5 trillion effort, which included a $10 billion uh, defense investment fund. And it was unclear to me exactly how much of that was going to be debt, classic JP Morgan debt and lending. But I do know that at least some of their intention is to take equity positions in young companies. So I don't know exactly what that mix was in this round, but $500 million of that $1.5 billion Series G embedded in the bigger $2 billion financing round was preferred equity from Blackstone, a major player. So as we're seeing in Reveal technology, we're on the same track at some level. Is inorganic growth is an interesting and less explored way to grow for startups generally, like truly early stage entities. But we're seeing a lot of that from the likes of Anduril and Shield AI. Shield AI has actually built a significant business on top of two significant acquisitions they made over the past 5 or 6 years. One was Heron Systems, which is like an intelligent dogfighting automation capability that has been segued into the Shield AI HiveMind capability that's now being deployed onto CCA and other autonomous wingman type craft. And then they also bought Martin UAV, a Texas-based UAV company that build the VBAT, and they've now kind of battle hardened and deployed the VBAT into various places and have a number of kind of derivative products off of that. So I realize I'm rambling here, but why does this matter? It is a continuation of this inorganic growth vector as a major method for growth. Which I think is very useful to explore and understand. Certainly for us, we're paying attention. We've acquired a couple of companies in the past 2.5 years, and intend to do more of that as we wend our way into this category of high growth non-traditional contractors. But it is an interesting mix. It's private equity, it's traditional venture capital, it's a bank or a debt lender, all getting in the mix. Much of the use of proceeds are earmarked for the acquisition of Echelon technology. I think that I'm Echelon or Echelon. It's a specialist company in pilot training and autonomous simulation, which sounds right up Shield AI's alley. And I know that the recently installed new CEO at Shield AI. Shield AI is to grow the company's revenue significantly. I think he's put some targets out there, something like $250 million in 2026 or something, which seems like a mismatch between valuation and intended revenue profile. That being said, I don't know what the Echelon acquisition is going to bring in terms of, current year revenue. So Dave, what do you think about this? How does this hit you? Shield AI has obviously been a fixture in the defense VC space for a while.
Yeah, and I think that historically they've been seen as sort of overhyped, but I think that this is very squarely a bet on software replacing pilots. And I think it's probably correct. Maybe not all of them, maybe 19 out of 20 pilots. There's one still manned aircraft that's controlling the unmanned aircraft, but it's a very logical bet to me. And even the bets in simulation and the simulation meaning autonomy, if the computer isn't flying the plane, it sure as heck is still going to be training the human to fly the plane, the human leader of the pack.
Yeah, overhyped. I mean, that could be said about nearly any venture-backed project. This Shield AI is quite high profile, and so like Anduril, it gets a mixture of enthusiasm and skepticism. And I guess only time will tell. With that kind of capital influx, I got to imagine this extends their runway and operating horizon out significantly, which matters in this industry. Okay, next one, PDW, Performance Drone Works, Huntsville, Alabama-based drone manufacturer, small drone manufacturer, raised $110 million in a Series B funding, which they announced on March 27th. Dave, you've had a lot more exposure than I have to PDW team and hardware, so I'd love it if you kind of elaborated a bit on your observations there. I think they're seen as one of the handful of viable contenders who not only have like aircraft that fly and work, but also have a manufacturing backbone so they can scale and deliver the volumes that would be necessary to actually make a dent in requirements and the demand signal from Western militaries generally. The round was led by Ondas. Um, so I think this is just, yet another bet on American manufactured drones and clean supply chain small drones.
Volume's going to win the war or the next war is the bet they're making there. And I think I like PDW. I think we like PDW as an organization. Performance Drone Works. We've spent a lot of time on the range. We work with several of their products and UAS systems. And not only have they won consistently UAS acquisition bake-offs, competitive acquisitions programs, but I think they're probably well positioned to win, to keep winning. So my assumption is that this is largely to scale. And allow them to produce this sort of volume to meet the demand that Uncle Sam's got right now.
What kind of contracting activities have we seen? Like the big contracting activities have we seen with PDW in the past? I seem to recall that in the past few months, Skydio, another small drone manufacturer contender, they've been around for 15 or so years out of Redwood City, California, right down the street from where we used to live. They recently were awarded a sizable contract, and I'm forgetting if that was a production order, if it was sealing or something. Tell me about PDW, maybe in the context of other small drone manufacturers.
Yeah, so talking about a little bit of apples and oranges here. The Skydio contracting action was for the very small Group 1 platoon level, platoon company level drone systems.
Yeah,
PDW, yeah, yes, the short range reconnaissance. The C-100 is like more of the mid range reconnaissance class. So most of the acquisitions success they've had so far is in that sort of like company to battalion sized UAS systems, like the Group 2 domain. And then they have the Army's ordered those. The PO Aviation, the program office that buys them, has bought them in some significant volume and issued them out to the transformation and contact brigades of the United States Army. And I think there's been similar procurement activity from the other services, at least from the White Soft environment.
I see. I'm just throwing a Gemini search or research to a prompt about PDW contracting activity. I'm seeing September 25 to March 26, PDW secured over $36 million in cumulative orders from the U.S. Army. It includes a notable $20.9 million contract specifically to supply C-100 drones equipped with multi-mission payloads for reconnaissance and electronic warfare (EW) activities. And they're being fielded by units in INDOPACOM, EUCOM, and CENTCOM to evaluate organic air support, giving squads their own strike and surveillance capabilities without needing to call in larger assets. So is this a squad asset or is it something more? Have you seen how they intended the CONEP, like the concept for employment?
Yeah, the concept for it's a company asset. So
Company
the
asset.
short range reconnaissance are platoon level assets. The C-100 is designed to be a company level asset that's got modular mission payloads associated with it. It can perform ISR functions or logistical functions. I think even strike. I think there are strike payloads associated with it, kinetic payloads, and EW disruption. The whole range of like multi-domain effects you can weaponeer this thing. So given your task and purpose as the company, you can weaponeer it against the mission.
Okay, well, maybe one last note here and discussion if useful, but manufacturing capacity and being able to hit volume, I think you're right that wins the day long term. And that's certainly the demand from the acquirers in the U.S. military and Western militaries generally. Apparently, PDW has a facility called Drone Factory 1 or 01. It's a 90,000 square foot facility in Huntsville, which is a military town. For those who don't know, Redstone Arsenal's there. It's the kind of home of Army aviation and a bunch of space stuff and a bunch of stuff.
It's also where there's an installation right down. There's an installation right down the road that also trains all the Army pilots, including the ones that flew by Kid Rock's house.
Nice. So that's where
it's the home of Army aviation as well.
The home of Army aviation, indeed. Lieutenants and CWOs, man. God bless them. Okay, so last item here. So they claim in this 90,000 square foot Drone Factory 1 facility in Huntsville that they can produce roughly 350 C-100s and up to 5,000 AM series drones per month. I don't know much about the AM series. I'm guessing that's a smaller variant, but per month, I mean, those are serious numbers. I mean, it's not Ukrainian, it's not Ukrainian numbers, but we're also not under existential threat in Huntsville, Alabama. or the U.S. mainland or homeland. So, but that sounds like a pretty useful set of volume numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. And the AM series is their attritable one-way attack.
Got it.
One-way
Okay.
attack system. Yeah.
Yep.
So high volume first-person view sort of system, if I recall.
Yep. Yep. Got it. All right. Last defense venture news item. I'm sure that there are other deals that were out there and announced. These are just the big ones that are hitting kind of the big blotters. But on March 31st, so this was yesterday at the time of recording, Saronic Technologies announced it had closed a $1.75 billion Series D funding round. This is specifically to facilitate the Port Alpha project, which is Gulf Coast autonomous shipyard that is intended to be the production facility for a variety of autonomous surface vessels, specifically their 24-foot Corsair and a 180-foot Marauder platform, which I think to date we've only really seen prototypes of these craft. But again, kind of doubling down on this volume is king um, trend in the industry, or demand in the industry. Port Alpha is intended to produce these things at scale very quickly, and I think resonates with current Secretary of the Navy Phelan and his intentions to do things on time, delivery on time, at scale, without excuses, and leveraging the non-traditional contractor base if at all possible. So a couple of other notes here on the round. More than doubles the company's last valuation, getting to $9.25 billion that followed their Series C fundraising just over a year ago. Lead investor was Kleiner Perkins, and pretty significant continued participation from all the folks who have been in with them before: Advent International, Bessemer, DFJ Growth, BAM Elevate, Andreessen Horowitz, APC, Elad Gil, a bunch of others. What's your sense of this, Dave? Is this just yet another kind of trend line in the direction of autonomy and volume?
Ben, I've spoken bullishly uh, about Saronic on this podcast in the past, and I still am. I think that they're one of the most credible, if not the most credible, neo prime. They're dangerous to the incumbents. We are designing, same as we were talking about with CCA, removing the pilot work. Their niche started with autonomy and building the ship around a really smart computer, and removing humans from the equation. But now they're getting into redefining how we build ships and how we manufacture ships at scale. I think that Saronic is going to be massively successful.
Yeah, we'll see. I guess only time will tell. They need to execute, right? And it does. I think this is a continued item, or a continued trend line of the software-defined shift in manufacturing generally, and how we think about hardware and force projection and a whole range of other things. Okay. Huntington Ingalls is obviously the incumbent, kind of the legacy player that is, if not at threat, then certainly being challenged to get down with innovation and do things differently. And I think they were the likely kind of target for Secretary Phelan's comments about delivering on time and under budget and performance and all that stuff. And so I think it's very useful. I think it's very useful for the government to issue contracts with Saronic, and for the venture industry to back them, if only so that we positively disrupt the existing kind of incumbent layer of defense vendors, so that we get
All three of your deal book items are investments in delivering on time, high volume, autonomous weapons.
that's right.
All three. The steel benders are paying attention. And if you're hunting in Ingalls, you're debating whether or not you are partnering, or taking a hard look at your business model, I think. And again, like if Simon, I'll represent Simon. If Simon were here, he'll say, like, wake me up when it's a trillion, as opposed to their existing $500 million contract. But hunting in Ingalls scares.
It's not fair for us to razz Simon in absentia. But if I were to put on the Simon hat this week, which I don't have a punk band hat, so maybe I can't even do that. But if I were to do that, I would vocalize my concern that American labor is the loser in Saronic's rise, because autonomous shipyards means that there will be fewer, industry laborers and union folks. And again, I don't mean to caricature Simon's position here, but he's I think he rightly considers and vocalizes stuff like that. What does this mean for the labor and industry base that traditionally underpinned everything that we do in America? We'll see.
It's a good point.
Simon, defend yourself. Okay. Let's pivot into the next topic, Dave. Iran. So tonight, and again, we're recording this on April 1st. President Trump has indicated that at 9 p.m. Eastern, is that right? 9 p.m. Eastern, is that right, Dave?
I think 9 p.m. Eastern. Yeah.
9 p.m. Eastern time, he's going to issue some kind of formal statement on the status and our intentions with respect to the conflict in Iran. We've been engaged there for, I think, just over a month at this point. We've kind of exhausted target lists from what I understand. There's been a massive kind of demonstration of autonomy and AI inflected application of force at standoff, no boots on the ground. All at the same time, we're hearing from President Trump that we're only going to be there for a couple more weeks. I can hear him saying that in his voice, just 2 more weeks, or whatever. We'll be out very soon. It's going very well. But there's still mobilization and forward deployment of ground troops, right? So the discussion that we had last week on the podcast was all about what does it mean for the 1st Brigade Combat Team of the 82nd Airborne to be deployed forward and being prepared to do something in zone. Like, I don't know what that means. 2 different Marine Expeditionary Units, the 31st and the 11th MEU, and the associated amphibious ready groups are being deployed into the region as well. Like, what are they doing there? If we're going to be out in 2 weeks, what are we even doing? Like, what? So there's a lot of confusion, and I don't want to prognosticate too hard ahead of President Trump's statement, formal statement this evening, which will have happened by the time this goes live, probably 12 hours or so after President Trump's statement. But what are we to make of all this? What is happening, Dave?
I think that all of those movements that you've seen were just to generate options, right? That set of folks, like we talked about last time, that set of military units is just to generate the option or the credible threat of attacking to seize Karg Island. I don't expect, again, I'm not going to prognosticate. I don't expect that we're going to hear some announcement of major ground conflict tonight. We'll probably, to your point or your impression, we'll probably hear like, here's what we've accomplished so far, and here's how we intend to get to drawdown, or here's how we see the end of conflict. So without taking guesses on that, I think the most interesting recent news cycle to me is, I think it's well understood that Iran's defense is asymmetric, right? It's proxy groups, and it's asymmetric capabilities in hybrid warfare. They don't intend on going toe to toe with the might of the U.S. military. But there's an interesting thread to pull there, which is Iran is threatening to attack, obviously, energy and water and telecommunications, but they're also now threatening to attack American technology companies. And that's new. I mean, supply chains have been attacked since the beginning of war, since the Romans were conquering. But this is a new type of military target, and I think it's an interesting conversation about whether or not an American tech company that might be in the backyard of the current conflict area are legitimate military targets. Like, when does dual use tech become a military objective?
Yeah. And like we discussed last week, the United States and Israel have largely avoided targeting and affecting non-military targets and non-leadership targets in Iran. In other words, I think that we can take at face value the statements by the Israeli government and by our own government that we don't want to devastate that country or its economy. We just want the leadership to behave differently, right? And so, in other words, this is not a conflict aimed at the Iranian people or the Iranian state. It's a conflict aimed at the Iranian regime and the way that they are behaving. And so I think, the Israelis and the Americans, we've held off on doing critical damage to energy infrastructure and other civilian pieces of civilian infrastructure. That being said, this isn't a full blown conspiracy theory, but you're you're smiling. I swear to God, it's not going to be all that weird. But
I just want another Trump impression.
I'm not very good at it. I got to work on it. You'd think that since he's been around for 11, 12 years on the political scene, like I would have made more advancements in my impression.
Everybody has a Trump impression. Yours is better than average. I'll give you that.
That's very generous. Okay, so here it is. We might be out of Iran, in the president's words. We might be out in 2-3 weeks. But what would you use ground forces to do if not to put them into the Iranian mainland? Well, maybe there's a case to be made for taking Karg Island. We've discussed that. Obviously, the economic importance of keeping the Strait of Hormuz open, especially the narrow point just off of Bandar Abbas in Iran, is a critical economic, global oil, global energy choke point. We need to keep that open. We want that to be open. It matters a lot to the world.
I know what you're going to say, and this isn't a conspiracy. This is go ahead.
I don't think you fully know what I'm going to say. I've got two things that I don't think you know that I'm going to say. Well, who knows? Maybe. Okay, so limited ground force incursion into Karg Island or the narrow part of the strait, that could make some sense if one of the objectives is to actually keep that sea lane open. So last week we saw the Houthis finally get involved, likely at Iran's direct behest, to start affecting infrastructure, Israel, aligned forces in the Gulf, and potentially sea and shipping lanes through the Red Sea, which is the other side of the Arabian Peninsula. And I could see ground forces actually executing an incursion into Yemen. I don't think Trump really, really wants to do that kind of thing. He doesn't want to put formal, conventional boots on the ground anywhere if he can avoid it. But like confronting the Houthis, one of the kind of surviving vestiges of the Iranian proxy network, and force projection, asymmetric force projection capability, that could be interesting. And then the last one, and you can respond to any or none of this stuff, but the last one is there's been an influx, not very well reported, but there's been an influx of American special operators into the region beyond the 82nd Airborne, beyond the 2 Marine Expeditionary Units. And I've got to believe that some of that has to be aimed at somehow finding, recovering, securing, neutralizing the 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium that are somewhere in the country. And it might not all be in the same place. It's likely underground. It's likely in quite secure facilities. So again, like you almost have to put ground forces into the mix to do something about the highly enriched uranium. All right, what say you, Dave? These are quasi-conspiratorial theories that I've got going.
I'll start with that last one. Which is the uranium, finding it and then something relatively surgical, I think is what we're talking about. That brings me back to my instructor days. I can remember myself saying, what is the difference between an attack and a raid? Mm-hmm. A planned withdrawal. Right?
That's right.
A planned withdrawal. So that's right. If we can find and target
Black Hawk Down, that was a raid. Black Hawk Down was a raid, and it went terribly wrong, and it turned into a catastrophe, right? And so like that's always, so that's, even though a raid sounds like it's quick and clean and in and out and all that stuff, it could go wildly wrong. So anyway, sorry to jump in.
No, that's right. It could go well. It's high risk, high payoff. But I don't have. That's a clean objective. Hey, one of the problems here is that they have 400 kilograms of uranium somewhere. We're going to find it, raid, seize it, and extract it. And extract the team, not triggering a prolonged ground conflict. That makes sense to me as an option or a potential objective, as does attacking to seize Karg Island, although that has, I think, more significant second and third order effects. But to your point, like, it's risky. A raid gone poorly can end in something that looks like Black Hawk Down, can end in, or bad intel, can look like something that looks like Black Hawk Down that pulls us into recovering our folks and a prolonged ground war, which I don't think anybody wants. So I don't. I
Or
think it's just a list of
or
just a list of bad or risky options.
I totally agree. Or it could look like the Venezuela Maduro raid, which went off with basically without a
Exactly.
hitch, no friendly casualties, and a demonstration that we can still do crazy, sophisticated, high level things and completely change the the geopolitical landscape in a region. Or for that matter, the 2011 Bin Laden raid. So I'm not saying any of this is possible or likely or impossible or anything, but I am very interested to know what is going to happen next. I kind of doubt, and this is to your point before we pressed record today, I doubt President Trump is going to say anything really truly earth shattering. I think that what he's likely trying to do is calm the political tides and calm the global markets with some issuance of statements or whatever. But we'll see. Maybe it will be significant. Maybe it won't. I don't really know.
I'm also very curious on what Iran's response is going to be. So the thread that I was pulling there was maybe an empty threat, but the threat to those regional nodes of American industrial base in the region, they threatened to start at 8 p.m. today, which I think is 3 minutes ago, or something, like 12:30 my time. They were pretty specifically like, the IRGC was like, we're going to attack both cyber and kinetic things like Amazon Web Services
Right.
and Microsoft
Right.
and Google Cloud. And I don't know how credi- credible that threat is or what their actual capabilities are, but I am curious. One, what AWS, how AWS, Microsoft, and Google are thinking about this, as they have nodes all across all across that area of operations. And I'm also curious what that means for sort of future warfare. I mean, they've got stuff in UAE and Bahrain and uh, I think more and more in Saudi Arabia. There's a long list of targets. Is this a legitimate military target? Will Iran actually go as far as striking them? Which is, I think, a little closer to our like domain expertise than some of the other tools that Iran has available.
I think that I have two thoughts. One, you mentioned the Emirates, the UAE. They, along with I think France and Spain, both have recently indicated that they will not allow for American Israeli or other affiliated countries to base or stage military assets that are going to be used in the Iran context within their political boundaries. Airspace, I think, is part of that too. I don't know why Spain. I don't know what Spain's problem is, but anyway, I think that it's fairly embarrassing that the West has been essentially deterred by the Iranian regime. They don't have nuclear weapons, but we've been deterred for a long time simply by the threat that they might get, nuclear weapons. We somehow have let them control a major oil shipping lane through the state of Hormuz, or the Strait of Hormuz, which I've got to believe is Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, in his encouragement of the Trump administration to kind of finish the job, so to speak. It's basically like you got to get rid of this Iranian veto on this major economic thoroughfare. So I think that it's pretty embarrassing that the international community hasn't been able to solve this specific problem. Ditto, North Korea. Before they had a nuclear weapon or nuclear weapons, um, we allowed that to become a deterrent effect in East Asia. And I think that some of the Trump administration's motivations have got to be like, we got to head the Iranian problem off before they get to North Korea status, because it's a sizable country that sits right in the middle of like critical energy, shipping. Um, so
So,
anyway, time will tell.
so if the president says tonight, it's over, we are in effectively a worse position than we were when we started the conflict. Is your point?
Potentially, I mean, it depends on what worse means, right? Like they are less able to spin up or re-energize their nuclear programs, at least hypothetically, theoretically, and their ballistic missile programs and drone programs have been seriously degraded, right? Which I think those were the two big items. but we still allow them to exert influence in the region, which is, I think, not okay.
So I've tried to ask you this. I've tried to ask you this question twice now. I'm going to try a third time, but I'm going to do it much more. I'm going to do it much more directly. We are an American technology company. Iran is threatening attacking American technologies, not us, right? They're talking about threatening the Amazons and Googles of the world. Do you think that that is a legitimate military target? If those companies are hosting military information in their cloud or producing targeting information or ISR information, are those legitimate military targets for Iran to attack in its defense?
So I'm gonna partially dodge your question and just say that Iran doesn't care what is or what is not a legitimate military target. I mean, just just look at the Iranian backed stuff going on in the region: Hezbollah, the Houthi rebels, others, right? Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hamas, others, right? Like, they are very specifically targeting civilian, not just civilian infrastructure, but civilian people and non-combatants as part of a terror campaign, right? This is the Iranian asymmetric uh, modus operandi. Like, this is just how they are. This is how they've chosen to behave, and I think that specifically is what needs to be stopped, right? And like, and having a de facto veto on oil shipments through the Strait of Hormuz and turning that on or off, that has downstream, like, catastrophic market effects that eventually impact everybody in the world. I just don't understand how we let a regime get away with this kind of thing without massive multinational pressure to stop it.
You did dodge it, but it was an effective dodge. Iran doesn't care. Iran doesn't care is the answer.
But maybe the question you're really asking is, would we on our side do the same
I
thing
probably could have framed it that way.
No, but I think that's a valid question. Would we do that? I don't
In this,
think that. I think we have demonstrably not done that, right? We regret severely, I think, as a nation, the accidental targeting of that school that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, where 100 young women were killed in a school. It's incredibly tragic. We did not intend that. It was the misapplication of targeting software, from what I understand, or something like that. And we would never intentionally do that, right? We as a country find that to be morally abhorrent. But would we deploy cyber tools to somehow, like, degrade critical infrastructure or some tech company in the Iranian drone supply chain that otherwise is just a bunch of civilians doing their jobs? Yeah, probably. But I don't think we'd put out, like, targeted hits on people or true civilian infrastructure. I don't think we would do that. Like, the days of Sherman marching through the South that's way behind us.
that's I think that's fair. I just think it's an interesting topic that, like, what is going to come in the, data is the new oil sort of conflicts. What is a legitimate military target and what isn't for Uncle Sam?
Yeah.
And
It
like
depends on the tool. It depends on the effect.
yeah, I agree. And collateral damage and all, like, there's not a blanket rule to be applied here, but it gets a little more confusing when you've got multinational companies that are hosting military data, maybe some, uh, maybe very little, or none, but they're associated with the company that is. Disruption. What are the impacts? What are the effects that you can get?
I mean, AWS is very overtly involved with the Maven Smart System configuration. It's Palantir, it's AWS, and it's apparently Anthropic. Maybe not long for Anthropic. Maybe it's some other tool getting woven into the mix there. But I mean, AWS is clearly part of the mix.
But is that facility in their region specifically part of the mix, right?
Even if it's not, I think the point you're making is, even if that facility isn't in the region, just by nature of its affiliation with the mothership, Amazon and AWS, like, is that a valid target?
That's what's going to get really murky, I think, is
And
the
how do
point that
you
I'm doing a poor job making.
escalate and counter escalate when an adversary is targeting that kind of capability, right? And that, I think, that is the tricky, sticky weirdness of this conflict, because Iran fundamentally has to behave in that asymmetric terror projection fashion, or it needs to use conventional military capability to put at risk civilian infrastructure, or some mix of the two. and some of those are lines that we won't cross.
And another prong in that asymmetric strategy that they're employing is cyber. There's been a bunch of stories, they hacked Kash Patel's email or something. It doesn't seem like what they've done so far has been particularly impactful, or that they have a deep bench of really good offensive cyber capability. But Russia used it to pretty devastating effect, especially early on in the Ukraine conflict. If Russia were to support them, their offensive cyber capabilities might become more robust, or the Chinese, right? Both of which have pretty robust offensive cyber capabilities. And where does man, that battlefield terrifies me, probably because I'm not an SME on the topic. But I would prefer that we not progress from hacking Kash Patel's email to hacking the U.S. energy grid.
Totally right, and I don't think many of those bridges have been crossed. I'm sure some attempts have been made, but once you kind of cross those bridges, you almost can't uncross them, and you get into an as yet unexplored escalation counter escalation game between belligerents, and it's strange. It's a weird world.
Energy's on the table now, and water's on the table. And I don't
the water thing is super interesting because Israel depends on its desalination plants, and that's I think, in all honesty, more important than almost any other facility in the state of Israel. Clean water comes from the sea through desalination facilities, and you do damage there, you are putting at risk the entire Israeli population. That's serious.
That broaches it comes close to broaching the biological or chemical weapons in my mind, attacking a civilian population's water supply. That's a line I hope we don't start crossing.
It's been a long time since we did anything like that as a nation, and I hope we don't ever go that direction again, to your point. Okay. Usually at this point in the podcast, as we wrap up, we would poke fun at Simon in some way. He's not here to be poked, though, so what can we do, Dave? What do you got?
I guess you're gonna have to do another Trump impression.
No, I don't think I should do that. I don't think I should do that. The other thing that we often ask Simon to do at this point of the podcast is prognosticate a bit on the political situation. I think that the Iran conflict, coupled with a few of the other kind of recent Trump administration policies, deployment of ICE in various ways, et cetera, I think those are the things that are going to be the deciding factors in the congressional midterms coming up, which, I mean, that's highly contested. The Democrats seem to be flipping a lot of seats that were understood to be relatively more safe for Republicans in the past. And I guess we'll see what happens there too. But that could seriously change the Trump administration's ability to affect policy. It would also trickle all the way down into our piece of the industry around how is the defense industry funded? How is our force projection affected by a contested Congress or a contest between the Congress and a Congress that's probably more willing to stand up to a Trump administration, and what happens there. So I think there's a lot of murky waters and troubled waters. I don't know what other water metaphors we can throw out there, but storms are coming, Dave.
Strap in. Be prepared and be prepared to show up.
That's right.
4 hours early to the airport.
Go buy that toilet paper and start stocking up on water supplies and whatever else. Okay, it's been an invigorating conversation, a lively conversation. Thanks, Dave, and thanks everybody. We'll see you next week.